As humans, we are constantly talking to ourselves. The voice in our head is estimated to jabber along at a mind-boggling 4,000 words per minute. These stats are only set to get worse as the internet takes up more and more of our time, bombarding us with news, notifications, and cat videos. So it turns out that much of our experience on Earth isn't just what we do or who we interact with, but it comes from the voice in our head. Sometimes our voice turns against us in chatter, and this impacts our mental health. This book shows us how we can deal with our chatter to live happier and more fulfilled lives. Hey friends, my name's Rohan. I'm a second year medical student studying at Cambridge University. In this video, I wanted to start a book club type thing. Hopefully it'll encourage me to read a bit more. Today I thought we'll discuss a relatively new book called Chatter by Ethan Kross, who's an experimental psychologist specialising in emotion regulation. First, we will talk about the voice in our head and chatter, and then we will discuss some of the tools which Kross suggests we can use to overcome chatter. I've selected just a few, but the book goes through many more. The tools are categorized as ones you can implement by yourselves, ones you implement with other people, and tools involving the environment. So let's dive right into the content. First, we have to accept that we all have a voice in our head, which is an incessant chatterbox. Left to its own devices, our inner voice acts like a stream of verbal consciousness, running through all sorts of random things about what you've done today, past conversations, and even predicting the future. I'm sure if you tried meditating, you'll understand just how hard it is to sit there without some random thought flying into your mind. And science backs this up, because even when we aren't saying anything, neuroimaging studies have shown that there is activity in Broca's area, which is responsible for speech productive. And this is active when our inner voice is talking to us. The inner voice is not a bad thing. When brought under our conscious control, the inner voice acts as a neurological leader, helping us to pay attention, think logically and creatively. The problem with the inner voice is that when it turns against us, it can lead to chatter. Chatter can simply be defined as a problematic or negative self-talk. It often occurs when we zoom in too much on something and lose perspective of the situation. Chatter can influence our performance. One example is when elite footballers, who usually score penalties for fun, find it much harder in high-stakes situations, like major finals for example. And I've experienced this too. When I used to play chess competitively, when I went to these big national tournaments, I tended to overanalyze the situation and doubt myself, rather than just trusting my preparation and my calculation. This sometimes stopped me from playing the best move, even when I knew it was good. Kross summarizes this phenomenon by saying, however it manifests itself, when the inner voice runs amok and chatter takes the mental microphone, our mind not only torments, but paralyzes us. It can also lead us to do things that sabotage us. Persistent chatter can also lead to chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system, resulting in stress. This is a risk factor for certain conditions like anxiety and depression. Okay, so we've established that the inner voice is integral to our cognition, but that chatter is not a good thing. Let's now talk about the tools which the book suggests to reduce chatter, starting with the things we can do ourselves. The way we get around chatter is by changing our thoughts. This is because what we think influences what we do and how we feel. This is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is one of the most effective treatments for depression. The most effective way in changing our thoughts to combat chatter is by zooming out of negative cycles of thought. In other words, to get a better perspective on the situation. One way in doing this is by employing distant self-talk. This is when you talk to yourself in the second or third person, so saying you or even your own name when talking to yourself. The author explains this technique by using the interesting conundrum of Solomon's paradox. Solomon was one of the kings of Israel in the Bible, who is known for his wisdom. However, he was much better at giving advice than taking his own advice, and he ended up marrying hundreds of women from different faiths and did things which alienated the Israelites from God. This led to the demise of his kingdom. So basically, depersonalizing yourself from the situation will help you to have less of an emotional response, but a more well thought out response. To do this, imagine that you're giving advice to a friend rather than yourself. Another technique is to try adopting a fly on the wall perspective by seeing yourself from afar. In the book, they did experiments where they took two groups of people and asked them to replay an upsetting memory in their minds. The first group were to replay it from their own perspective. These people were called the immersers, whereas the other group were asked to replay it from a fly on the wall perspective, and this group was called the distancers. They found that the immersers focused more on the hurt in a verbal stream exercise, whereas the distancers were able to emerge from the experience with a constructive story. Further experiments have shown that distancing decreases brain activity in emotional centers and decreases the cardiovascular stress response. Thirdly, a useful technique for dealing with exam stress or heavy workload is to reframe the situation as a challenge rather than a threat. This is something I found helpful when dealing with the carnage of second year and just trying to gamify the situation a bit. For example, I did a game one day where I tried to do 1,000 Anki cards in a day, which wasn't really the most useful way to spend my time, but it was one way to have some fun in an otherwise pretty grim situation. Now let's move on to tools involving people. It's important to understand when people come to others for help with their chatter, they generally have two needs they're trying to fulfill. On the one hand, they're searching for care and support. These are their emotional needs. And on the other hand, they are searching for concrete advice about how to move forward and gain closure. These are their cognitive needs. Addressing both of these needs is vital to actually help the other person deal with their chatter. And apparently, according to the book, repetitive opening up about negative emotions isn't necessarily a good thing. Well, at least if it's not done in helpful ways. For example, studies on people dealing with chatter after traumatic events, such as 9/11, has shown that people who open up more frequently had increased rates of anxiety and depression, even though they initially felt better after talking to a friend. This may be because by allowing someone to vent their emotions repetitively, we are actually facilitating further reveling in chatter. This is known as co-rumination. Too often we focus on someone's emotional needs with good intentions, but neglect their cognitive needs. So I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't allow someone space to express their emotions, but we should try to offer practical solutions or ways of reframing the situation to address their cognitive needs. This will prevent repetitive cycles of great emotional expression, which may actually increase chatter rather than decrease it. Another thing is that sometimes offering advice about how to reduce chatter can backfire if the person doesn't explicitly ask for help, because in a way it threatens the person's sense of control or autonomy. But that doesn't mean that we can't help. This is where we can offer something called invisible support, i.e. without the person you're helping being aware that you're helping them. So one approach involves covertly providing practical support, like cleaning up around the house without being asked, to make that person's life easier. So the first 2 points involved providing support to others. When we ourselves seek out support, it is important to find the right person to talk to, and this can be done in a domain-specific manner. You want to get the right balance of emotional and cognitive support to deal with the specific cause of chatter. For example, depending on the situation, I may go and choose to discuss issues with a male friend instead of a female friend, or go to a church friend rather than someone else in college. Another way of improving well-being and reducing chatter is by seeking out physical contact. And obviously this has to be done in a respectful way. Physical contact leads to the release of oxytocin and endorphins, which reduces stress and increases levels of bonding between people. Obviously this is harder in the current pandemic, but even embracing comforting inanimate objects like a teddy bear or a security blanket has been shown to be helpful. Finally, we need to be careful how we use social media, as it's essentially a highlight reel of people's lives. It will inevitably make you feel worse about yourself, even if you're not aware of it. Several studies have found that social media can have adverse effects on people's mental health. The main thing is to avoid passive scrolling through social media, but instead to use it actively. For example, to arrange meetups or calls with friends. This is how you actually connect with people, rather than simply putting hearts on people's posts. Finally, let's talk about how we can use the environment to combat chatter. There are two things I want to talk about in this section. Firstly, nature has been shown to reduce chatter. Specifically, it helps recharge the batteries of executive function, which basically means it helps us to concentrate for longer and to make better decisions. This was shown in 2007 by Berman and colleagues. They first had participants perform a demanding test which involved them hearing sequences of numbers up to 9 digits in length, then repeating the numbers in reverse order. Then, half the participants went out for a walk in the local woods for an hour, while the other half walked down a congested street for the same amount of time. Then they came back to the lab and repeated this attention task. The findings were that participants' performance on the attention test was considerably improved after the nature walk, but not the urban walk. This experiment was repeated with the groups swapped around, and at different times of the year with different weather, and the results still remained. This is one of the reasons I prioritize exercise even during exam season, and I prefer to run outside rather than going to the gym. I find it really helps me de-stress and to mentally reset. It's even been shown that a video of green spaces improves attentional reserves. This suggests that there's probably something hardwired into our brains, which is affected by the very image of nature itself. Secondly, control over our environment can reduce chatter. This technique is often employed by professional sportsmen. The book uses the example of Nadal's pre-serve routine, but I like cricket, so I thought I'd use the example of Steve Smith's idiosyncrasies before facing a ball. By going through this ritual of touching various parts of the padding and making sure they're all perfectly aligned before facing up, Smith exercises compensatory control. This means he is creating order in his immediate physical environment, which helps create order internally, or as some people like to say, quietening the voices in his head. This helps him focus for hours on end at the crease, and his teammates have acknowledged this by saying that he's almost on a different planet when he's batting. One simple way we can apply this is by tidying our working environment. Sometimes when we are flustered or stressed about work, it's good just to clean up the desk and to reset your workspace to neutral, as a way of getting compensatory control over our situation. So that's all that we have time for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I think it's important to talk about mental health, but also about ways we can improve it. Get involved in the comments, it's a safe space. There's a link in the description below if you want to check out this book. Anyway, take care and bye for now.